My stepmom lied about her past for years. When I accidentally met her dead ex-husband, I exposed a web of lies that broke our family apart. I, 32F, never thought I'd be in this situation, but here I am, seeking advice from the Reddit community. I grew up in a small town in Oregon, in a loving family with my parents and my younger brother, Alex, 29M. Our childhood was filled with camping trips to Crater Lake, weekend barbecues with neighbors, and holiday gatherings with extended family. My parents, James, 58M, and Elizabeth, would be 56F, were high school sweethearts. They met during a school play. Dad was working on the set, and Mom was the lead actress. Their love story was the stuff of small-town legends. They got married right after graduation and worked hard to build a life together. Dad started his own construction company, while Mom became a beloved elementary school teacher. Alex and I had a comfortable life growing up. We never wanted for anything, but our parents also taught us the value of hard work. I remember helping Dad in his workshop, learning how to use tools and build things. Alex was more into sports, and Mom never missed one of his little league games. Everything changed when I was 14. Mom started feeling tired all the time and losing weight rapidly. At first, we thought it was just stress from work. But when she collapsed during one of Alex's baseball games, we knew something was seriously wrong. The diagnosis came like a thunderbolt: stage 4 pancreatic cancer. The next 2 years were a blur of hospital visits, chemotherapy sessions, and watching my vibrant, loving mother slowly fade away. I still remember the smell of disinfectant in the hospital corridors, the beeping of machines, and the hushed conversations between Dad and the doctors. Mom fought hard, but the cancer was relentless. She passed away when I was 16, leaving a huge void in our lives. I can still vividly recall her last days, how she made us promise to take care of each other, how she told us she'd always be watching over us. The day of her funeral was surreal. The whole town showed up, and I remember thinking how strange it was to see my tough, strong dad cry openly. After Mom's passing, our family dynamics shifted dramatically. Dad was devastated. He struggled to balance his grief with being a single parent to 2 teenagers. The construction company, once his pride and joy, began to suffer as he struggled to focus on work. There were nights when I'd find him sitting in the dark, staring at old photos of Mom. It was during this time that my Aunt Sarah, 55F, Dad's sister, stepped in to help. She lived in the next town over and started coming by more often. She'd cook meals, help with laundry, and most importantly, she got us into counseling. I was resistant at first. I didn't want to talk about my feelings with a stranger. But over time, I found it helpful to have an outlet for my grief and anger. Alex took Mom's death particularly hard. He was only 13 when she passed, and he started acting out, skipping school, getting into fights. I tried my best to be there for him, but I was dealing with my own pain. It was Aunt Sarah who finally got through to him, convincing him to channel his emotions into his sports instead of destructive behavior. About a year after Mom's passing, Dad started attending a support group for widowers. He said it helped him process his grief and connect with others who understood his pain. It was there that he met Diane, 50F. I remember the first time Dad mentioned Diane. We were having dinner, a rare occurrence since Mom passed, as we often ate in separate rooms or at different times. Dad seemed nervous, pushing his food around his plate before finally telling us about this kind woman he'd met at his support group. He was quick to assure us that they were just friends, but there was a spark in his eyes that I hadn't seen in a long time. Diane quickly became a regular presence in our lives. She was kind and supportive, always ready with a listening ear or a home-cooked meal. She'd bring over casseroles, though they never quite matched up to Mom's recipes, and would sit with Dad for hours, just talking. I was glad to see Dad smile again, even if it made me feel a little guilty, as if by being happy, he was somehow betraying Mom's memory. They started dating about 6 months after they met. Dad sat Alex and me down to talk about it first. He was nervous, stumbling over his words as he explained that while he'd always loved Mom, he felt ready to open his heart again. Alex was sullen and quiet during the conversation, but I tried to be supportive. I wanted Dad to be happy, even if the idea of him dating felt strange. 2 years later, Dad and Diane got married. It was a small ceremony in our backyard, nothing like the big church wedding Dad and Mom had. Before the wedding, Dad had another serious talk with Alex and me. He made it clear that while Diane would be his wife, she wasn't meant to replace our mom. He said he'd remain the primary parent and asked us to treat Diane with respect as an important adult in our lives. Diane had her own story of loss, which she shared with us over time. She told us about her late husband, Eric, who had died in a car accident 5 years before she met Dad. She spoke about their struggles as a young couple, how they had lived paycheck to paycheck in a tiny apartment in Seattle. She described Eric as a dreamer who was always chasing the next big idea but never quite making it. Diane said she had worked as a bookkeeper to keep them afloat. According to Diane, Eric's death had left her alone and financially unstable. She had to sell their apartment and move to a smaller town where the cost of living was cheaper. That's how she ended up in our town, she said, working as an accountant for a local business and attending the support group where she met Dad. Her story made me feel sympathy for her. I knew how hard it was to lose someone you love, and I could imagine how difficult it must have been for her to start over in a new place. It also made me appreciate how lucky we were to have had Mom's life insurance and Dad's business to keep us financially stable after Mom's passing. As the years went by, Diane became a fixture in our family. She never tried to mother us, respecting the boundaries Dad had set. Instead, she was more like a friendly aunt. She was there for holidays and family events, always with a smile and a kind word. She encouraged me when I decided to go to college out of state, and she cheered the loudest at Alex's high school graduation. Now, fast forward to the present. I've been working at a multinational corporation for the past 5 years. I started in the marketing department and worked my way up. I recently got promoted to a managerial position, which I was thrilled about. The new role came with more responsibilities, including attending important client meetings. Last month, during one such meeting, I met a potential client named Eric Thompson, 55M. As soon as I saw him, I felt a strange sense of familiarity. He was tall with salt and pepper hair, dressed in an expensive suit that spoke of success. I couldn't place where I knew him from, but I was sure I had seen his face before. Throughout the meeting, I kept stealing glances at Eric, trying to figure out why he seemed so familiar. He was polite and professional, showing interest in our company's services. His company, a successful tech firm, was looking to revamp their marketing strategy, and my team was pitching our ideas. After the meeting, as we were saying our goodbyes, Eric looked at me curiously and asked if we had met before. I admitted that he looked familiar, but I couldn't place where from. We laughed it off, chalking it up to one of those strange coincidences. That night, as I was going through some old family photos, it hit me. There was Eric, standing next to Diane in a photo from their wedding day. The same Eric who was supposed to have died in a car accident years ago. In the photo, they were both younger, but it was unmistakably the same man I had met earlier that day. I felt like the ground had disappeared from under my feet. How was this possible? Was Diane lying about her past? And if so, why? My mind raced with questions. Had she been lying to us all these years? Did Dad know? Was their whole relationship based on a lie? I didn't know what to do with this information. Should I confront Diane? Tell my dad? I was worried about how this revelation might affect my family, especially my dad who had already been through so much. The loss of Mom had nearly broken him. How would he handle learning that his current wife had been lying to him for years? I spent the next few days in a daze, trying to process what I had discovered. I couldn't concentrate at work, and I kept replaying every interaction I'd had with Diane over the years, wondering what else might have been a lie. Had she really struggled financially, or was that part of her act too? Was anything she told us about her past true? Finally, I decided I needed more information before I could decide what to do. I reached out to Eric, asking if we could meet for coffee to discuss some follow-up questions about the project. He agreed, and we set up a meeting for the following week. I'm nervous about this meeting. I don't know how to bring up Diane without seeming unprofessional or potentially jeopardizing the business deal. But I feel like I need to know the truth before I can move forward. What if Eric denies knowing Diane? What if he confirms my suspicions? I'm not sure which scenario scares me more. I'm torn between loyalty to my family and the need for honesty. What if Diane has a good reason for her deception? What if revealing the truth destroys my dad's happiness? But how can I keep such a big secret from him? Dad and I have always been close, especially since Mom died. The thought of lying to him, even by omission, makes me feel sick. Then there's Alex to consider. He's always been more volatile than me, quicker to anger. How would he react to learning about Diane's deception? Would it send him spiraling back to those dark days after Mom's death? I'm looking for advice on how to handle this situation. Should I confront Diane first? Talk to my dad? Meet with Eric and try to get more information? I feel like I'm carrying a huge burden, and I'm not sure what the right thing to do is. Any advice would be greatly appreciated. I never imagined I'd be in a situation like this, and I'm feeling lost and overwhelmed. How do you tell someone that the life they've been living for years might be based on a lie? How do you even begin to unravel something like this without destroying your family in the process? Update 1: It's been 2 weeks since my last post, and a lot has happened. I want to thank everyone for their advice and support. Your words gave me the courage to face this situation head-on, even though every step has been challenging. I decided to meet with Eric as planned. The meeting was set at a quiet cafe near my office, a place I often go to think when work gets stressful. I arrived early, my heart pounding as I waited for Eric to show up. The familiar smell of coffee and pastries did little to calm my nerves. When Eric arrived, we exchanged pleasantries and ordered coffee. I knew I had to be careful about how I approached the subject, so I started by talking about the project. As our conversation progressed, I carefully steered it towards more personal topics. I mentioned that I had recently been looking at old family photos and noticed how much one of my relatives resembled him. Eric looked curious but not suspicious. Taking a deep breath, I pulled out the wedding photo of him and Diane. The moment Eric saw the picture, his face went pale. He stared at it for what felt like an eternity before looking up at me with a mix of shock and confusion. "Where did you get this?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. His hand shook slightly as he reached for the photo. I explained that Diane was my stepmother and that she had told us he had died in a car accident years ago. Eric's shock turned to anger, then to sadness. He put his head in his hands and took several deep breaths before he started to speak. Eric told me that he and Diane had indeed been married, but their relationship had been far from the struggle-filled, loving partnership she had described to us. According to Eric, they had met in college. Diane was studying accounting, and he was majoring in computer science. They fell in love quickly and got married soon after graduation. At first, things were good. They were young and in love, ready to take on the world together. Eric got a job at a tech startup, and Diane worked as an accountant for a small local business. They weren't rich, but they were comfortable. However, as Eric's career began to take off, Diane became increasingly unhappy. She complained about feeling left behind, about Eric working too much. Eric admitted that he had been focused on his career, but he thought they were building a future together. Then, Eric discovered that Diane had a gambling problem. She had maxed out their credit cards and taken out loans in his name to fund her addiction. When he confronted her, she promised to get help, and he believed her. He loved her and wanted to support her through her struggles. But Diane didn't stop. Instead, she got better at hiding her activities. She even started stealing money from the company where she worked as an accountant. When Eric found out, he was devastated. He felt betrayed and knew he couldn't trust her anymore. When Eric told Diane he wanted a divorce, she didn't take it well. She threatened to ruin his reputation, both personally and professionally. She told him that if he left her, she would make sure everyone believed he was abusive and that he had stolen money from his company. Fearing for his career and reputation, Eric agreed to a quiet divorce. He paid Diane a significant amount of money to leave quietly, with the agreement that they would never contact each other again. He had no idea that she had been telling people he was dead. As Eric finished his story, I felt a mix of emotions: anger at Diane's deception, sympathy for Eric, and fear for my father. I thanked Eric for his honesty and assured him that I would keep his information confidential as far as the company was concerned. After leaving the cafe, I called my brother Alex. I knew I needed an ally in this situation, and I wanted his input before approaching our dad. Alex was as shocked as I was when I told him what I had learned. We agreed to meet at my apartment that evening to discuss our next steps. Alex arrived at my place looking worried. As we sat in my small living room, the same room where we'd spent countless hours playing video games and watching movies growing up, the weight of the situation really hit me. We were about to shatter the life our dad had built for himself over the past decade. We spent hours talking about how to handle the situation. We were both worried about how this news would affect our dad, but we also knew we couldn't let Diane's deception continue. After much discussion, we decided that we needed to tell our dad the truth, but we wanted to gather more evidence first. Over the next week, Alex and I did some digging. We found records of Diane's divorce from Eric, as well as some old news articles that mentioned financial troubles at Eric's former company, troubles that coincided with the time Diane worked there as an accountant. We also discovered that Diane had a history of financial problems, including bankruptcies and unpaid debts, that she had never mentioned to our family. With this information in hand, we knew it was time to talk to our dad. We invited him over for dinner, telling him we had something important to discuss. The next evening, as we sat around my dining table, we carefully began to share what we had learned. Dad listened in stunned silence as we told him about my meeting with Eric and showed him the evidence we had gathered. At first, he didn't want to believe it. He accused us of misunderstanding or of Eric lying. But as we presented more and more evidence, I could see the realization dawning in his eyes. The look of betrayal on his face broke my heart. When we finished talking, Dad sat quietly for a long time. Then, without a word, he got up and left. Alex and I were worried, but we knew he needed time to process everything. We spent a sleepless night, wondering if we had done the right thing. The next day, Dad called us. His voice sounded tired, but resolute. He told us he had confronted Diane with what we had told him. At first, she had tried to deny everything, but when Dad mentioned Eric's name, she broke down and admitted the truth. Dad told us he had asked Diane to leave the house. He said he needed time to think about what to do next, but he thanked us for telling him the truth, no matter how painful it was. He sounded hurt and angry, but also determined. Now, we're all trying to process what has happened. Dad is hurting, but he's also angry at being deceived for so long. Alex and I are doing our best to support him, but it's a difficult situation for everyone. I'm still trying to come to terms with the fact that the woman I've known as my stepmother for years has been living a lie. I feel guilty for being the one to uncover this truth and potentially ruining my dad's happiness, but I also know it was the right thing to do. I'll update again when there are new developments. Thank you all again for your support and advice. It means more than you know during this challenging time. Update 2. It's been a month since my last update, and things have been intense. I want to thank everyone for their continued support and advice during this difficult time. Your words have been a source of strength for me and my family. After Dad asked Diane to leave, she didn't go quietly. She started calling and texting Dad constantly, alternating between tearful apologies and angry accusations. She claimed that she only lied to protect us, that she truly loved Dad and had changed. When Dad didn't respond, she started reaching out to Alex and me, begging us to talk to Dad on her behalf. We stood firm in our decision to support our father. We blocked Diane's number and advised Dad to do the same. It was a difficult time, especially for Dad. He struggled with feelings of betrayal and self-doubt, questioning how he could have been fooled for so long. To help Dad through this, Alex and I took turns staying with him at the house. We didn't want him to be alone with his thoughts. We spent evenings talking, looking through old photo albums, and reminiscing about Mom. It was bittersweet, but it seemed to help Dad remember the genuine love he had experienced before. About 2 weeks after the confrontation, we received a surprising call from Aunt Sarah. Apparently, Diane had reached out to her, trying to get her to intervene on her behalf. Aunt Sarah was shocked by what we told her, and she immediately came to town to support us. Her presence was a comfort, especially for Dad. She had always been there for us during tough times, and this was no exception. With Aunt Sarah's encouragement, Dad decided to see a therapist to help him process everything. He was reluctant at first, but after a few sessions, he admitted it was helping him work through his emotions. As for me, I had to deal with the professional fallout of this situation. I spoke with my boss and explained the situation with Eric, assuring him that it wouldn't affect our business relationship. Thankfully, my boss was understanding, and Eric himself reached out to confirm that he held no ill will towards me or my company. Alex has been my rock through all of this. He's taken time off work to help with Dad, and he's been the voice of reason when my emotions threatened to overwhelm me. I'm grateful for his strength and support. Last week, we received news that Diane had left town. A mutual friend told us she'd moved back to Seattle. Part of me is relieved, but another part feels strangely sad. Despite everything, Diane had been a part of our lives for years, and her absence leaves yet another void. Dad is slowly starting to heal. He's talking about possibly joining a support group for people who have been through similar experiences. He says he's not ready to think about dating again, and honestly, I don't think any of us are ready for that either. As for me, this experience has made me reflect on trust and honesty in my own relationships. It's been a harsh reminder that things aren't always what they seem, but it's also shown me the strength of genuine family bonds. We're taking things one day at a time. There are good days and bad days, but we're facing them together as a family. The road ahead isn't easy, but I believe we'll come out stronger on the other side. Thank you all again for your support throughout this journey. Your kind words and advice have been a beacon of hope during this dark time. I'll update again if there are any significant developments, but for now, we're focused on healing and moving forward.